Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes!
Yes! The center back, Jacob Glesnes.
He's going for it. Oh, my God! What a goal! And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello and welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. And your Philadelphia Union are back in action tomorrow night as Inter Miami come to town. Miami come to town after their game over the weekend against DC United, which ended 2-2. And as we know, the Union blew yet again another lead, this time against the New York Red Bulls. And we'll be hoping that's not the case against Miami this Wednesday. Well, joining me to preview this upcoming matchup is a guy who will be on the call for Inter Miami on Wednesday. He's a former commentator for Gold TV and BN Sports, and current lead play-by-play for CBS and Paramount Plus, calling their Serie A games. And he's also the lead play-by-play for Inter Miami, Andres Cordero. Dre, how are you doing?
Hey, Todd, good to talk to you, man. Thanks a lot for the invite. Looking forward to this.
Absolutely. It's always a blast when I get to talk to commentators for different MLS teams, because I feel like, you guys have the best job in the world where you guys get paid to call the game in front of you and everything. And it's cool talking to journalists and everything that cover the game, but you guys are in the booth and everything. And it's always a blast just getting to talk to just people around MLS. And it's interesting too for me too, because, this is the first time I think this has ever happened where I've had guests on back-to-back podcasts where they came from the same university, the exact same thing they studied in college. I had Stefano Fusaro on the podcast, who does play-by-play for the New York Red Bull Spanish broadcast. And for my listeners that don't know, you went to FIU as well. So this is a first.
Yeah, the back-to-back FIU alums, a little South Florida connection. He's a great dude. I've had a chance to interact with him on Twitter. We're a different breed down here in South Florida. We live for the game, so it's fun to dive into MLS the way that we've gotten a chance to, from the gap in the disappearance of the Miami Fusion to the emergence and eventual inauguration of Inter Miami. It's been a wild ride. We've got a different perspective down here.
Absolutely. And before we get into today's topics, I just got to say huge props to CBS and Paramount Plus for the coverage of Serie A, the U.S. Men's National Team Champions League, because when it was announced that CBS were getting the rights to all three, I'm not going to lie, I didn't have high expectations because we never got great coverage of Serie A in America. And the last rights holders for the Champions League, in my opinion, they did a underwhelming job. But to see the lineup that CBS has been able to put together, the production that CBS puts on, sending you guys to locations to call a game, I think that's the key right there. It makes such a huge difference for listeners back at home. And you guys are painting a true picture of the action that's happening right in front of you. And listening to the halftime, and the post-game shows, it's been great joy for me, and I'm sure for other listeners that tune into CBS's broadcast, because all those guys and girls do a phenomenal job with the research, with you guys giving enough information where it doesn't come off where it's too much information. It comes off, you get enough information where if you never watch a Serie A game, if you never watch a specific team in the Champions League, you guys do such a phenomenal job giving that information out. And so I just wanted to give you guys and everybody at CBS a huge props for that.
Thanks so much. That's really lovely to hear. It's got a lot to do with Pete Radovich, who's put the teams together, be it for the Champions League, for the national team, for Serie A. I'm privileged to work on 2 of those projects. I did the U.S. national team games away from home in the World Cup qualifiers. We're wrapping up our first season of Serie A coverage with CBS, which I covered previously with my co-commentator Matteo Bonetti when we were together at BN Sports. I think the philosophy, like the mentality, whether it's the CONCACAF the Champions League, UEFA Champions League, the Nations League, the World Cup qualifier, Serie A, is that the game is supposed to be fun. And I think often broadcasts lose sight of that. Right? It gets so sort of serious and suited up and stuffed up with a tie that, it's as if we were covering the stock markets. And the first reaction is always, who do we blame and who's at fault and who are we, pinning this on? And I think our approach is different. Our approach is get a group of people who vibe together, who know the game, and give them that feeling of friends talking about soccer, whether it's, the commentary team with me and Matteo, or me and Moe do on the national team games, or the studio coverage where Poppy Miller does an incredible job with Mike Grella, Marco Messina. We've seen what, Clint Dempsey and Guccio Nyewu and Charlie Davies and all those, and Moe do what they do on set. Like, you just get the feeling that you're watching a group of friends enjoy something as opposed to putting in work. I've been at this now for many years, since I think 2004 is when I started my career. And the last, year and change, going back to my CBS debut in the Nations League final, where like my second game for CBS was USA Mexico, with a trophy on the line. From that moment on, it's just been a little bit of a different perspective on how to cover these games and how to have fun with it. And I think, the fact that people like you are enjoying it, people who are knowledgeable about the game are digging it, that means the world to us.
Absolutely. And how's it feel? Because I'm sure it's like night and day difference where you guys have called games on monitors and everything. But like I mentioned, you guys are going over to some of these stadiums in Italy, calling the game from location, which, it makes a world of difference, I'm sure, for you guys. But like I said earlier, just for the listeners at home as well.
Yeah, so I've had quite the year, right? So we did the USA Mexico game in Azteca Stadium, the World Cup qualifier. It was a 0-0 draw, but it was as entertaining and as well as US have played in Mexico in my memory. For Serie A, we did Milan-Napoli in San Siro. We did the Milan derby, Milan and Inter in San Siro. We did the Derby d'Italia, Juventus-Inter, from the Allianz Stadium in Turin. So just, steadily crossing things off my bucket list on a week-to-week basis. And it's really just been an enormous pleasure and a privilege to do.
Absolutely. And also, like I said in the intro, you're the lead play-by-play for Inter Miami, who took on DC United, like I mentioned. And, there was probably a fair result for both teams. Inter Miami, they went up 2-0 in that game, gave up a goal to Taxi Fuentes right before halftime, which was a pretty big blow for Miami, as they gave DC United hope and belief in that game, and it put them right back into the game. And Inter Miami thought they had the third with Lassiter beating Bill Hamid on his near post. Beautiful run to pick out the run by Lassiter, and then the finish. A goalkeeper shouldn't get beat near post, but I think that strike had enough pace and power on the ball that Hamid wasn't expecting. And unfortunately for Inter Miami fans, it was rolled off sides. But both DC United goals came from Miami being too late to shut down the ball, shutting down Estrada and Canals, who were given too much time and space to find Fuentes and Kamara. And I thought this was a game that eventually, like I said, just both teams deserved a point in this. I thought the midfield battle probably evenly matched between these two teams. Both teams had plenty of shots on target. And, ended 2-2. What are your thoughts and takeaway from this game?
So I have the same sense that you do, that the draw and a point apiece was a fair result. DC United improved dramatically in the second half. They came out looking a little bit more sharper, with more of a sense of purpose. Even then, I think Miami were quite good up until sort of a formation change to try and manage the result with about 26 minutes remaining, and didn't go that well for them. But I'm from the sort of like Johan Cruyff school of football analysis, which is take the goals out of it and then analyze the game, and that'll give you a better idea of how the two teams played. One of the things I love about our game, about soccer, is it's the only team sport I could think of where you can quite literally outplay the opposition and still lose, or play worse than the opposition and still win, right? I think that makes our game special. I can't imagine that happening in American football, NFL, in basketball and baseball. Basically, the team that plays better wins. Our sport is unique in that sense. It has that bit of a niche. And so keeping that in mind, I thought this was, in my opinion, the best game I've seen from Inter Miami this season. Granted, it's a sort of third restart for the club. First year they changed managers from year one to year two. Phil Neville is brought back for a second season, but there are wholesale changes within the squad, to the extent that I believe only Gregory of the starters against DC United was a regular starter for Miami last season. And so that gives you an idea of what turnaround has been like for this club. It's almost like a brand new start. And that said, there's going to be some growing pains. And up until this point, there were games in which they didn't really have a ton of control, where they were reactive, where they weren't great in transition. I thought against DC United at home, having not played particularly well against Tormenta of the USL League One in the US Open Cup, but still advancing to the round of 16 with a take on Orlando, there was a challenge to this team, a challenge issued by Phil Neville at halftime of that Tormenta game. They came out and they played quite well in the second half. And I thought they played really well in the first half, especially against DC United. This was as coherent a performance as we've seen from Inter Miami, where their possession was positive, where their passing was slick, where Gregory, I think he misplaced one pass in the entire first half. A player who has grown into the season, was arguably Miami's best player last season, didn't start very strong, but of late has been very, very good, was solid. Lassiter was a constant threat. And there's a nice little chemistry developing between Ari Lassiter and Leonardo Campana, where before they scored that goal where Lassiter goes to the byline out wide, swings a low-driven cross in, and Campana just has that sort of goal-scoring instinct to get in front of his marker and just redirect it in goal. They've done the exact same play, and Campana was this close to getting on the end of it. And you see where that chemistry is starting to develop. You see the development of Robert Taylor sort of learning his role within this team. He, by the way, maybe more than any other player on this team, is worth the price of admission. With Robert Taylor, even if it doesn't sort of translate to, production directly in terms of goals and assists, which I think it does to an extent and will more so going forward, there's a sense whenever he gets the ball that something special is about to happen, that something fun is about to happen. And twice in the first half, or end the first half, early second half, he gets the ball 1v1 with Brad Smith, nutmegs him, and makes something happen. You just kept wanting the ball to go back to him just to see what he would do next. And so again, I think this is as good as Miami have looked this season. Maybe a little unlucky not to get the win, some lapses in concentration, letting DC United back into it. Fair result in the end, but a positive thing for Phil Neville and Miami to build on, going up against an opponent that they know very well. They've played Philadelphia a number of times, haven't had a ton of success, though the last trip to Subaru Park is probably one of their better memories.
For sure, and we'll bring up that memory because that's a memory that a ton of Union fans on social media. I've talked to Union fans at games, and yeah, they're not too fond of that memory as the Higuain brothers had their way against the Union in Subaru Park. But that's also interesting that you brought up about the roster change because I just got done talking to Jim Curtin, and that's the first thing that he mentioned about this Inter Miami team was when they got the scouting report. They didn't recognize any of the names. It's basically a whole new team. And he's like, you don't know what to expect because, like you mentioned, I mean, yeah, this team has a history playing each other in the past, but most of the players on the roster haven't played against the Union before. And one of those players, the main player for Inter Miami so far this season, Leonardo Campana, who was on loan from English side Wolves. There's a younger player who's playing fully motivated, who's trying to get into the Ecuador World Cup roster. Leo has 6 goals and 2 assists in 11 games for Miami so far. I mean, what have you made of his season so far where you look, they pay a high fee for Julian Kranza, who we'll talk about, I'm sure, here later. They bring in Gonzalo Higuain, and they go on and get another striker. And Campana has looked the best of all those guys that they brought in. And like I said, just what do you make of his success so far?
It's been a really pleasant surprise, honestly, because Leo Campana is a guy who broke out with the Ecuadorian and the youth national teams in 2019. And, that's what got Wolves to pay attention to him. It led to that Premier League move, although he's been sort of loaned out. And when he came to Miami initially, he came here, according to him, on vacation. He packed for 12 days. He had like 3 T-shirts, a couple pairs of pants, some sneakers. He was expected to be in South Florida 12 days like most other tourists, and then, head back home to sort out his footballing future, at least his immediate future. And it was on that trip that I guess conversations opened up with Miami. He fell in love with South Florida, and the loan deal got done. A loan deal that has an option with a buyout clause or with a purchase clause at the end of the season. I think if you ask Chris Henderson, and I have, he would like to exercise that option today as opposed to at the end of the season, because just Campana continues with every performance to grow his importance within this team, to grow his stature in MLS. He really is off to a terrific start, and keeping a good player, whatever you make of Gonzalo Higuain at this stage in his career, he still has goals, he still has assists in him, and he's been Miami's best player, certainly last season. So to keep Gonzalo on the bench just tells you how well Campana has fit into the system, how consistently he is producing. And he's just a sort of a natural goal scorer, even though he hasn't been at the professional level, at the top flight level, a volume goal scorer at any point in his career until now. He's breaking out as that currently on this Miami team. And so hopefully he's got a lot of football in Miami left. It is just a loan deal, but as I said, that loan has a purchase option. And right now he looks like one of the most lethal finishers in MLS, and Miami have needed that.
Looking at his advanced stats, I'm glad you brought that up because he has 13 shots on target, which is 6th most in MLS, and 46.1 of his shots on target have resulted in a goal, which is 2nd most in MLS when you look at players that have had 13 or more shots. I mean, he's been having a phenomenal season, and I can just remember the guys over at MLSsoccer.com just like freaking out about how well this guy's been playing. They've been talking about him a lot, and then they go on the 4-game winning streak like, okay, this isn't the Miami that joined the first season in 2020 in MLS. This is a brand new team. Campana, they finally go out and get a striker that's scoring goals. And like I said, 2nd most in MLS when you look at players that have 13 or more shots on target that result into a goal. I mean, that tells you how lethal he's been, like you said. And, I think one reason his stats in both of those categories are so high is because of his movement. Not only his movement inside the 18, but his movement running into the 18. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of players in MLS this season that makes their movements off of defenders that he's made or knowing what space to run into. And he's been a joy to watch at only the age of 21, I believe.
So yeah, he looks and plays older than he is, right? He's only 21 years old. Again, he hasn't been a consistent starter on a top flight, team in Europe yet. Although the way he's playing right now, he's going to have certainly a ton of suitors for Wolves to consider their options. But at 21, he's come here and just broken out in MLS in a way that, Miami have tried some other young players like Mati Pellegrini last season, the season before that, coming over from Estudiantes. Julian Carranza, who's doing quite well at Philadelphia now, but never really, hit those high notes in Miami. I think he scored maybe at the end he added some, but for the bulk of his time in Miami, he had 2 goals. They were in the same game against Atlanta. And he got, he was the guy who was called on the most in the absence of Higuain to try and provide some goal scoring. He did so many other things well off the ball. Was tenacious in his pressing, made great runs, but just wasn't finding the back of the net in a way that he has for Philadelphia. And it'll probably be a big miss for you guys, given the clause in his contract that means he won't play against Miami. He would be highly motivated, I think, to play against the Herons. So, his absence is probably a positive for Miami, but other players have been given that opportunity when Higuain wasn't there to really, cement their place in the rotation, and none had until in comes Leo Campana and has shown a maturity that you probably don't expect from a 21-year-old. He was injured a couple games back against New England, about 11 minutes in, a bit of a scare. Missed the following match, which was the U.S. Open Cup game, returned against Charlotte, didn't have his best game, but then comes back home against DC United and scores, the first for Miami, opens the deadlock. So often he's scoring the first goal for this club, the one that allows them to sort of just settle in and play their best football and get the nerves sorted out. That said, the development that the chemistry that he's building with, I think, Lassiter and of late Robert Taylor bodes really well going forward for Miami.
Man, I think he had like 2 or 3 volleys in that game against DC United. Like the swerve on that ball, like the audacity that he had the confidence to try that just tells you the kind of form that he's in, where not a lot of players are going to go ahead and try to hit that ball on the volley. But Campana, like I said, 2 or 3 chances in that game on volleys. One of those shots are going to go on the season with more and more confidence that he's playing with. But Miami sitting in 13th place in the Eastern Conference with a record of 3-6-2, or in our 1-4 on the road so far this season in MLS play. Miami found themselves on a 4-game winning streak for the first time in team history, with wins over Miami FC, New England, Seattle, and Atlanta. They were unfortunate to give up the first-minute goal against New England, the game that you said Campana got injured in. They also had 2 red cards in that game, which I thought was pretty unfortunate. Anytime you go down a man or let up a goal right at the start of the game, you've got to get back in that headspace. We got to get another goal back. And Jim Curtin always talks about how you got to start games really, really good in the first 10, 15 minutes. And once you start those 10 to 15 minutes good, that's going to dictate how the rest of the game is going to go. And the Union luckily have been able to find some success early on in the season to get a goal in the first couple minutes of the game. And I don't know if we'll see that against Miami this Wednesday, but yeah, I mean, it was unfortunate for Inter Miami to give up that goal against New England, and the game against Charlotte, that's a game that Jim Curtin also mentioned. They were unlucky to lose that game. I mean, they lost that game 1-0, and they had a lot of good looks in that game, a lot of shots on target. The last 8 games, though, in my opinion, all competitions, Miami, they've looked really, really well, 5-2-1. I know Miami fans are probably a little bit nervous because they don't look totally organized at times in the back. But other than that, I think this is the best, like you mentioned, especially the game against DC United. That's the best game you've seen from Inter Miami. I mean, they're playing with a ton of confidence right now. And not just the DC United game, but just as a season as a whole, what have you made of the season?
Yeah, so keeping in mind that it is sort of a third restart in 3 years, that it's a new project with so many new pieces because of some of the shedding of the roster. For example, Lewis Morgan was one of Miami's best performers the last couple of years. They allowed him to go in a trade to New York Red Bulls sort of out of necessity. They knew that they would have some pieces that would have to move. Nico Figal was a solid option at center back and right back. He's gone to Argentina. LGP was part of that back line. He's gone to Argentina as well. Miami sent 2 of their starting center backs to River Plate and Boca Juniors, 2 of the biggest teams in this half of the world. And so it has been a rebuilding. In that sense, I think Chris Henderson, the sporting director, deserves a ton of credit for this sort of rebuilding project that he's put together. And given the fact that it is a new start, that the team would have to sort of start to gel together, I think they hit a nice little run of results starting at the beginning of April. You mentioned that 4-game win streak. They beat New England. They beat Seattle away from home. It's their one away win this season. They advanced in the U.S. Open Cup, beating Miami FC and Tormenta of late. I think the results in those last sort of 7-8 games that you mentioned have been better than the football itself, better than the soccer, up until the game against DC United, where I thought they legitimately played well. On the balance of the game, were probably slightly better than DC, but the result, United put away a few chances, Miami let a few off the hook. So I think their start is something to build on, but it's certainly not where the Miami base expect them to be, where the ownership expects them to be, given what was sold at the start of this project, how Miami was going to be, and still very well maybe, one of the most important areas for soccer in the United States. Players want to come here. And obviously, we've all heard the Leo Messi news. I don't have anything to add to that, unfortunately, any inside information, but we know that could be sort of transformative for this club. And so I think it's a passing grade to start, but not one that the club could be, or the players will tell you themselves, hugely proud of. I don't think 13th in the East after 11 games is where they want to be. Given the sanctions, given all of the troubles that Miami have had, we've had some good news of late. The stadium deal was approved, so we are looking to sort of a 2025 opening of like an actual Miami-based stadium, which will be the first time that happens in MLS in South Florida. Remember, the Miami Fusion played at Lockhart, which is the stadium that stands where Drive Pink Stadium currently is. That's in Fort Lauderdale on the outside. But just watching them play against DC United gave me some hope going forward. It just looked more coherent. I keep going back to that word because I think that you judge a manager usually based on how well, at least is the way I go about it, is how well can I see what he's communicated to his team? And is his team sort of carrying that out? If I can make sense of what they're trying to do, well, then it sounds to me like that was the game plan and the players were executing it. If it looks like chaos to me, then I either the manager doesn't have ideas, or he's not sort of communicating those ideas in a way clear enough for the players to execute, or he's communicating them super clearly, but the players just aren't good enough to execute. And I think you look at that DC United game as one where it was clear what they wanted to do. They did it fairly effectively, and save for a couple of lapses in concentration, that cost them potentially 2 points, looked rather good. I know that Philadelphia have had some trouble holding on to leads, but they're a team that have been accustomed to scoring first. Miami have grown accustomed to conceding first and playing from behind, and to their credit, have still managed to get some results out of those games despite giving up the opening goal, which wasn't the case against DC United, but has been the case most games this season. I think previously, the only other game where they scored first was in the win away to Seattle, which is a difficult place to play, a really tough trip for them. But they scored the opener, held on, and ended up winning that game thanks to Robbie Robinson, game winner.
I'm not going to ask you about Messi. I knew. I was like, man, this is the perfect podcast having you come on when Messi's getting linked to the club. But, if in fact Messi does come to Inter Miami at the 2023 season, like it's being reported, hopefully Ray Hudson's still at the club calling games, because, man, some of his calls on BN Sports have been legendary. I think you and Ray complement each other so well in the booth, and I don't think fans, maybe some fans don't like how Ray calls his goals, but I don't know. It's such an iconic voice. It's like every time I hear Ray's voice, I'm like, oh, that's Ray Hudson right there. So if Messi does in fact come to MLS, I'm sure we'll get a lot more legendary Ray Hudson goals. But what I will ask you about, though, is as somebody that works for Inter Miami, you guys are always getting linked with European players. How annoying, or maybe it's not annoying, when you guys are reading this that, oh, well, people don't really understand the rules of MLS. They say, oh, Neymar to Inter Miami, Messi to Inter Miami. And it's like, we have this rule called designated players. Like, you guys are linking everybody and their brother to Inter Miami, where they can't bring all these players in. So is that annoying for you to read, to talk about? Or are you like, yeah, it's whatever?
Well, on your first point, if there's anything that can keep Ray Hudson from retiring, it's Leo Messi, right? So if there's anything that's going to keep Ray Hudson calling games for Inter Miami, it's a potential of Messi coming to this team. Ray has been like a soccer dad to me, to be honest, over the years. Like I from the moment I got into this business in 2004, I've been working with him and with another play-by-play commentator named Phil Shane, who I learned a ton from over the years. And those two have been sort of my soccer dads. I learned about broadcasting, about soccer, about the passion that they have for the game, and I owe so much to them. So to be calling these games with Ray at Drive Pink Stadium is just a real honor for me and an absolute joy. You can imagine just how much fun people have listening to Ray when the red lights are on and the mic is on. Well, it's just as much fun before, at halftime and after, and I'm just absolute privileged to be close to that guy who's just, he's his own institution. Ray Hudson, magisterial, describes it. That aside from that, I think we welcome those links. I think we welcome that reputation, even if it's churned against Miami a little bit, where there's an element of schadenfreude, I think, from fans thinking, this happens, by the way, in all sports. Miami. I've grown up here. I was originally born in Cuba, but I've been in Miami since I was 8 years old. I've worked here in football since 2004, as I mentioned, even though now I travel a lot for CBS and Paramount Plus. And so Miami is always that place where it's either you're allowed to have nice weather and good-looking people, or you're allowed to have good sports, and you're not allowed to have both, and sort of the national narrative, right? And so when the Hurricanes are good, the rest of the country is hating on the Hurricanes. When the Miami Heat are good, the rest of the country, at least this is how it feels from the perspective of a Miamian, it's that the rest of the country is out to get you when your sports teams are good, almost as if like you don't deserve a good sports team. And listen, some of that we brought on ourselves, right? The 2 fire sales that the Marlins did and that disastrous stadium deal that they did, the few things here and there that maybe rubbed the rest of the country the wrong way. But when it comes to soccer, when it comes to like this Inter Miami team, we welcome the links to Edinson Cavani and Gonzalo Higuain once upon a time, and now Leo Messi. Like that just tells you that you are a sort of credible and big club that players want to come to, that's going to be linked with the biggest stars. I think the other side of that is if you do sign big names, you've got to produce, because if you don't, you're going to end up being a laughingstock. Is it annoying? I think we've grown used to it at this point, so I wouldn't call it annoying. But we just know, don't believe anything until you see a player holding up a shirt. When you see Messi or anybody else holding up a pink shirt, then we can get into like a deeper conversation about what that means. For now, Miami naturally, because of what it is as a city, because of the ownership, because of the David Beckham link, because Jorge and Jose Mas have had the sort of political will and clout to make this happen, and have really been sort of the main driving force behind getting Miami and the stadium deal and all these things happening. We're going to be linked with big players. And more than that, I'll go ahead and say we're going to sign big players. In the history of Inter Miami, you're going to see big players wear the pink shirt of Inter Miami. That's just the reality of it. So get used to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all for the league. Jim Curtin was asked about that too today. He was like, have you seen the reports? He's like, yeah, I've seen the reports, but I'm not going to comment on it. It's an Inter Miami question. You got to ask them. And he said, the only thing I'll say is Messi's the greatest player to ever play the game, and signing a player like Messi only helps the league grow even further. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, some fans might get jealous with you guys bringing in, big European superpowers, but at the end of the day, I think it helps MLS, and I think that's, as fans, that's all we can ask for, is the league to get better and better, and for it to get the respect from people in Europe. I know there's always going to be people in Europe that say, oh, well, it's a retirement league. But if you look at it, Leo Campana, like we talked about, 21 years old, that's not a player that's here to retire. That's a player that is trying to get into the Ecuador national team. You look at Julian Carranza, like you mentioned, where he was young. He's still young, and he has a point to prove where, it didn't work out with Miami, but now he's found new life in Philadelphia. That's just the way that a lot of these MLS teams are going. They're going to the South American countries, going to the lower leagues in Europe, bringing in players that, weren't getting chances to, kind of kickstart their career or to get bigger talents in Europe to look at them. And, if you still get players every now and then, look, you see Chiellini linked with LAFC, I think. So you're always going to get players like that, but to see just your Zlatan, your Robbie Keane, your David Beckham, Steven Gerrard, Ashley Cole's coming in drones, it's not going to happen all the time, in my opinion. And I'm here for it. Whatever Inter Miami does, it's only going to help the league. But one more thing I'll say about Inter Miami is, if you look at the roster, Lassiter, we talked about quite a lot, playing on the left side of the formation. 3 assists, he's first on the team in that category. 10 key passes, fourth. Mota, who Jim Curtin said has one of the best left foots in MLS. He's been extremely impressive for Inter Miami this season. 16 key passes, fourth in interceptions, third in tackles. This guy's doing it all in the midfield for Inter Miami. Then you have Gregory, who had a solid year last season. Now he brings in a midfielder that's up at the same level as him. Those two are a good 1-2 punch in the midfield. Chris McKey, Damian Lowe look solid in the back at times. Just what have you made of the contributions from some of those guys that I listed?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, all those guys are newcomers, right? All those guys are new to the league in many cases, and certainly new to the team, part of the turnover this season. Gregory is the exception. He was one of our best performers last campaign, won the captain's armband, and more. became captain more because of his, as good as he was on the pitch. And again, I thought he was, along with Gonzalo Higuain, Miami's best performer last season. It was more in training, in the locker room, the way that he seemed to bring all of the different groups together, and get along with everyone, learn to speak English very, very quickly, always had a big smile on his face, was always joking with everyone. And it was just such a natural and easy decision for Phil Neville in the locker room to just make Gregory captain. And he's basically made that captain's armband his own. He continues to captain the team to this day, going back to last season. They bring in, as you rightly say, Jean Mota. And those mostly offensive stats that you listed for Mota that are, fairly impressive, a lot of that came while they were experimenting with him in a deep lying playmaker role, where often it was Mota who was further back, not so much to protect the back four, but more to help build forward and to help build out of the back, and Gregory playing a little bit higher up to try and disrupt the opposition playing out of the back and try and win the ball back in opposition half for Miami. That experiment seems to be a little bit over, as against DC United, when I thought they looked, again, better, more coherent. Gregory went back to that natural defensive midfield role, Mota in front of him. And one guy I'll highlight who you didn't bring up was Bryce Duke. Young player, very little MLS experience coming in, but adds such dynamism and energy along with those two more established guys, the two Brazilians who have a lot more professional top flight experience, mostly in Brazil. But Duke comes in and he's got this constant movement between the lines. He's a little bit more attack minded than the other two. Is just full of energy and trying to win the ball back off the opposition, turning the defense into attack as often as possible. I think that trio has established itself in the middle, and I'm really curious to see if Phil Neville repeats that trio against Philadelphia of Gregory, Mota, and Duke, because I thought it worked quite well. Now, take Duke out of that and put Indiana Vassilev, who's back on loan from Aston Villa after a spell on loan with Miami last season, and I think he did a lot of the same things well. Arriving as that sort of second wave of attack into the area, got on the end of some good crosses, scored a big game winner last season against Nashville at Drive Pink Stadium. And so I think there's some pieces that can move around there. Add to that, Robert Taylor, who I mentioned has played in a central midfield role, was then played on the left wing, where Lassiter is now. That's now played on the right wing, which moved Lassiter to the left. And that actually brought up some new positive things as well. And so I think with so many new pieces, Phil Neville is still sort of finding out not necessarily what his best 11 is. I think that's pretty close to being established, but what the best role for each of those players within the 11 is. And that's still sort of a work in progress. And I think the DC United match showed us a few hints as to what works and what doesn't. My best guess is a lot of that will be repeated against Philadelphia. And we're hoping down here, Miami, to better results, 3 points instead of 1. But it is nice to see the ways in which this team seems to be coming together. They're still 13th in the East. It's not good. What I'm painting is a positive picture. I think there is a lot of positive to look forward to, but 13th, where they are right now, is not good enough. And those lapses in concentration that cost them against DC United have to be sort of hammered out over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we mentioned earlier, I've talked to Union fans that still remember that game in Subaru Park between Miami and the Union where it ended 2-1. The Higuain brothers rolled back the clock. Had the way against the Union in that game. I mean, there's no other way to put it. They were phenomenal in the day, and Union fans are still bitter. And then you go down to Miami, where that game ended 1-1. The Union got a late goal from Kasper Schmeichel to tie that game up. But, this is a team where, like Jim said, there's a lot of new pieces on this roster. And you can't compare how Miami was in the past to how they're playing this season, because it's just a brand new roster, basically. And like you said, a lot of positives for Miami this season. I don't think Miami is the laughingstock that they once were in MLS. And sooner rather than later, I think we're going to start seeing more consecutive wins for Miami. But, there's a series minus the 3-0 trashing after the teams came out of the MLS is Back tournament in 2020. It's been pretty close every single game where, like I mentioned, the 1-1 draw down in Miami. Miami could have won that game. The Union, even though they dominated in shots on target and everything, back in Subaru Park, back at the beginning of the season last year, they still lose that game 2-1. So, I think there's a lot of respect, a lot of hostility between these two teams. I know we had that incident with Gonzalo and Jose Martinez a couple of years ago, even though Jose is going to miss this game because of yellow card accumulation. But, I think both teams are going to play a tough game and everything. And I know you said you want all 3 points. And for Union fans that are, feeling confident, I don't feel as confident as some fans might feel, because This is a Miami team that has a lot to prove. Like I mentioned, Jose Martinez is going to miss the game because of yellow card accumulations. Like you mentioned, Julian Kranza can't play because of the loan agreement between Inter Miami and the Union. Mikael Ua, the designated player that the Union brought in, Jim Curtin told us that he's not going to be able to help out in this game. So now you only have 2 strikers on the bench. And we've seen in the past when Jim's been short on strikers, they went to a 4-3-2-1 Christmas tree formation. So I think we could potentially get that again. But
well, so help me with my prep then. Go ahead and do some of my prep for me. You mentioned all of your absences. You got into some of the things I wanted to ask about Philadelphia. So how do you see them lining up if they do go with that Christmas tree formation?
Jim normally doesn't like to change his back line. He likes to have Wagner and Harriel as the 2 outside backs, with Glesnes and Elliott as his 2 center backs. But we've seen Jack Elliott play as a number 6 in past games. Hasn't looked the best there, but I almost get the sense that Jim Curtin wants to leave Leon Flock on the left side of the Christmas tree formation, not play him as a lone 6, because Leon Flock said plenty of times himself that he's more comfortable playing with another 6 next to him, not as the lone number 6. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Stuart Finley come into this game, even though Jim Curtin doesn't like breaking up the back line. Jim Curtin mentioned after the game against Orlando in the Open Cup that, Stuart Finley is deserving of more minutes, that we go to Portland right after the game against Miami where rotation is going to happen. And so maybe he doesn't rotate against Portland. Maybe this is the game against Miami where he rotates and he puts Jack Elliott at the 6 where he feels more confident with Leon Flock on the left side. And if that happens, then you look on the right side, Ali Bedoya, I feel like still going to start. And then your 2 10s would be Paxton Aronson and Daniel Gazdag, and then as your lone striker, I see it being Corey Burke, because Sergio Santos works better in a 2-striker set, not as the lone striker. We've seen that experiment last year against New England when we had a whole bunch of injuries to our strikers, and Sergio didn't play great as that lone striker. So that's what I would go with Kai Wagner and Nate Harriel as the 2 outside backs, Stuart Finley and Jacob Glesnes as the 2 center backs, Blake obviously in goal, Jack Elliott as the 6, Leon Flock on the left with Bedoya on the right, and then your 2 10s, Paxton Aronson and Daniel Gazdag with Corey Burke up top. Even though fans don't want to see Corey Burke anymore, he hasn't been having a great season. He started the season hot, but he's cooled off tremendously. And I think if I was Jim Curtin, I think that's what I would go with. But he would give no hints when we try to poke around that. So your guess is as good as mine. But he did admit that Jesus Bueno, who's more of a number 6, who has played as the 8, played all 90 minutes last night with U2. He said he won't get the start, but he could play a role off the bench in this game to close out the game. So, you start crossing off the pieces. All right, well, with Jose Martinez out, there's not many players on this roster that can play the 6. So either Jack Elliott or Leon Flock, but Leon Flock does not play great as the lone number 6. So he was responsible for that goal against Orlando. I think that was their first goal in the U.S. Open Cup, didn't track his runner. So Jim Curtin is definitely going to have a tough decision to make for this game against Miami. And like I mentioned, I'd go with those players in that formation against Miami.
I appreciate the scouting report. I'm a little disappointed that we won't see Julian Carranza, to be honest, just because I'd love to see. I know that he's made such an impact and become almost a fan favorite in Philadelphia with his effort, with his goals, and he's put it together in a way that he hadn't been able to in Miami, given his opportunities. I think he scored a couple of goals, against Atlanta. And so I was hoping to see him. It's a shame that the quote unquote fear clause will get in the way of that. Gazdag is a player I'm curious to see play, because I know he's been such a good playmaker for them, and just getting the sort of consistency and proper training as opposed to the sort of condensed schedule that he had last year, getting injured just ahead of the Euros in training camp. So I know he's probably one of the better playmakers in the league that isn't talked about too much outside of Philadelphia. And so I'm eager to see him play. I had a different thought. I thought Flock would slot into that defensive midfield role, and then maybe McGlynn coming in with Bedoya,
that's
as the
definitely
two players alongside of him. But I'll keep an eye out, and thankfully we don't have to wait too long because it's a midweek, Wednesday night clash at Subaru Park.
Yeah.
I know Bizo has sort of lost out on that role to Harriel of late with a couple of mistakes late last season and one early this campaign. Bizo's still a player that's good to have for them in terms of depth, especially going forward. Maybe Harriel a little more balanced, going backwards as well. The rest of the team, Jim Curtin's been around so long, and I think one of the strengths of his Philadelphia team is the consistency, the clarity of the project. People know exactly what's expected of them from the manager. The managers had more or less the same established and clear ideas for a while, and those ideas were successful to the tune of a Supporters' Shield trophy not too long ago. So I think it's one of the more solid teams in the Eastern Conference, despite the sort of recent struggles holding on to those early leads. Me, selfishly, I'm hoping those struggles continue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such an interesting game because I could tell you confidently in games prior where, okay, this is the lineup that the Union are going to throw out there. They're going to play the diamond, but because you're missing Mikel Uwa, you're missing Julian Kranzer, you're missing Jose Martinez. Yeah, I don't know. And look, I said 4-3-2-1. There's a chance, too, that they could play 4-2-3-1 with two holding number sixes with Jack Elliott and Leon Flock there, too. So Jim Curtin's also mentioned that he feels confident playing Matt Real, who's a left back, the backup left back to Kai Wagner on the left side of the diamond. So, I mean, there is so much that can happen here. But like I mentioned, the players and the formation 4-3-2-1 is what I would do if I'm Jim. And now watch me be completely incorrect. Watch Jim just throw us a bone and everything, say, yeah, I'm going to rotate. And then he's just having Miami prepare for that, which I'm sure, they're preparing for both, where they rotate a lot and then they try to come up with their best formation. So, I mean, that's what good managers do. But the last thing I'll say is my three keys to the game if the Union want to get a victory. Number one, got to be aware of Campana and his runs in the box. All 6 of his goals have come from inside the 18-yard. He's swifty. He has a high soccer IQ. And we talked about the space that he's able to run into. Number two, take advantage of your height. The Union average 18.8 aerial duels won per game, while Miami has an average of 9.6. Miami have given up 3 goals on set pieces this year, which is 5th most in MLS. Now, the reason, it's 5th most is because a ton of teams have given up 5, which kind of skews that number. So it's nothing to really be concerned about, I think, Miami giving up set-piece goals. And then number 3, quick 1-2s. Jim mentioned, if you want to have success, you got to have those quick 1-2s around the box. We saw that happen a little bit against Inter Miami and DC United. Jim said, it's the hardest play for center backs to defend. So those are the 3 keys that I'm looking for in this game against Inter Miami. And if the Union can hit on 2 out of 3 of those, then I think the Union come away with a victory. But, with the run of form the Union have been on with 4 straight draws, 5 games that they've blown leads, yeah, I'm not confident in a win. I'll be honest. So we'll see. I'm sure we'll get a great game between these 2 teams, as we always get. But, Dre, this is why you're one of the best in MLS with that preparation that you've shown with your kind of formation, which you're expecting with the Union. A lot of key points that you hit on, which shows me that you do know this Philadelphia Union team very, very well.
Yeah, listen, I've been in awe of what Jim Curtin has put together in Philly. We've had the pleasure and often displeasure of playing against the Union, and there's been a lot of consistency about the way they approach the game. I think when you look at one of the things that speaks really highly of him and of the system as a whole is how you incorporate new players, right? And you look at when Flock first joined the team, it's as if he'd been there for a decade. He looked like a guy who just sort of naturally slotted in. Julian Carranza, who struggled mightily in Miami, slots into that team and all of a sudden becomes a real goal-scoring threat. Does a lot of the things that he was doing in Miami well, but adds to his game. I think it speaks highly of just the system that's in place there, the preparation for every single game, and I think it's something to admire. So I'm excited to call this one. Calling the Miami games as a local boy, as somebody who grew up in South Florida, is one of the real joys for me professionally. So this is another one where personally I'm building my own little sort of rivalry with Philadelphia because I've done so many of these Philly-Miami games. You guys are becoming a regular derby for us.
There we go. And the last thing I'll end on before I let you plug your social medias is, so my listeners always know I live in Maryland. And so I only get the home team when the Union are away as broadcasters. So, yeah, when the Union go down to Miami, I look forward to you and Ray's call on the broadcast. And commentators that I've spoken to, they're like, oh, you got to listen to Danny Higginbotham. I've heard JP a couple of times, but I've never heard Danny Higginbotham call a game. It's like when the Union are home, I'm at the stadium. And then when they're away, I'm hearing you guys. So, I do appreciate that, getting a different taste. But one of these games, I guess I'll have to try to listen to Danny and JP call a game. But best of luck on the call, and where can people find you on social media?
So I can tell you that Danny is terrific. I had the pleasure of working with both JP de la Camera at beIN Sports on some CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers, and with Danny Higginbottom for ESPN. We did an MLS game, Atlanta, Philadelphia, out of the Benz, and he was just absolutely terrific. The man loves football, loves that Philadelphia Union club, and he could just talk your ear off about tactics, about soccer for basically days at a time without ever relenting. Those are my favorite people. So you have a great team covering the games in Philadelphia. Whenever you get the chance to listen to me and Ray, listen, I think everybody should have a little bit more Ray Hudson in their life. Certainly brightens up mine. And that said, I'm usually on Twitter, at Dre Cordero, basically that handle across all social media platforms. Don't at me, but I am there if you want to chat. Todd, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for having me on.
My pleasure, and speak again soon. And I want to give a huge shout out to Molly Dreska and Rafa Cabrera, who work in the Inter Miami's communications department, who helped me get Dre on the podcast. With these midweek games, it's so hard to try to go from reviewing the game to previewing the game. So I can say with confidence that a Portland Timbers preview episode will not happen. And so I'm just very, very grateful that Dre was able to take some time out of his day to come on and talk about this game. A lot of great information there. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And, if you guys aren't following the podcast on social media, follow at Free Kick Pod on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick. And I know last episode too, I told you guys that, so I got the website up and running. I said it was like thefreekick.net. Well, it turns out that apparently when I made the switch over, the domain name, it never took into effect. So I think it's still at thefreekickpodcast.com. But, we'll definitely get that website up and running with the name change and everything. But, I'm hoping for a great game. Hopefully the Union can finally stop blowing leads and finally win a game. It's been way too long, 5 games now that we've seen the Union not win, 6 in all competition. So it's just way too many games that the Union have gone on without winning. But with that said, they're still in 3rd place in the Eastern Conference, and they've only lost 1 time in MLS play. So I definitely feel a lot better than I did against the New York Red Bulls, but still not as confident as I probably should feel playing against a Miami team that, I'm sure a lot of you guys are underlooking. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is The Free Kick Podcast.